For my review, I chose the movie 12 Years a Slave. 12 Years a Slave is an adapted screenplay based off the novel with the same name, which was published in 1853 by Solomon Northup, who dictated his account to a lawyer named David Wilson. The memoir was published shortly before the Civil War and after Harriet Beecher Stowe's novel Uncle Tom's Cabin. It sold 30,000 copies, but after the Civil War fell somewhat into obscurity until the late 1960s. This adaptation was released in 2013, starring Chiwetel Ejiofor as Northup, Brad Pitt as Samuel Bass, Michael Fassbender as Edwin Epps, Benedict Cumberbatch as William Ford, Sarah Paulson as Mistress Epps, and Lupita Nyong'o as Patsy. The film was highly acclaimed, winning 3 Academy Awards for Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Picture, and Best Supporting Actress, which was won by Nyong'o. Steve McQueen, the director, became the first black director to receive an Academy Award and the first black director to receive Best Picture of Northup's life, including both the time before and the time after he was captured, with the majority of the film focusing on his life on the plantations. Northup was a free African-American living in Saratoga, where he was a farmer and landowner and professional violinist with his wife and 2 children, until he was invited to Washington, D.C. to play for a music tour. He was then drugged, kidnapped, and shipped south, where he was sold into slavery. He was taken to the plantation of William Ford, a so-called decent man, where, unable to completely hide his nature and intellect, he makes trouble for himself and eventually causes one of the white overseers to hang him. In one of the most brutal scenes of the movie, Northup is strung up on a tree and allowed to hang for an obscene amount of time, nearly dying before Ford cuts him down. Ford then sells Northup to Edwin Epps, a brutal slave master who routinely rapes his most productive slave, Patsy. Life on the Epps plantation sends Northup deep into despair and depression. He obtains paper and tries to send a letter north through a white man named Armsby, but is betrayed and later nearly caught by Epps. Later, after being forced to whip Patsy by Epps, Northup pleads with Samuel Bass, another white worker, who is sympathetic and sends a letter northward. Sometime later, a friend from the north comes to free Northup, and finally Northup is returned to his family. The movie is filled with visceral brutality and complex relationships, most notably the twisted relationship between Patsy and her master, of which Northup plays a small part. Northup's transformation is evident early on in the movie. On the ship going south, Northup is talking about overpowering the crew, stating his intent not just to survive, but to live. Months later, on the Ford plantation, Northup argues with a slave woman, saying, "I did what I had to do to survive." After the brutality he witnesses, Northup sinks deeper and deeper into depression, having no choice but to accept the reality of his situation or die. Patsy's desperate plea for Northup to kill her, asking him to do what she does not have the strength to do, shows the atrocities she and the other slaves witnessed. The commentary of the white men, though secondary to the overall story, is also quite memorable. Samuel Bass is eloquent and thoughtful, while Edwin Epps is cunning and tyrannical. Epps' line, spoken while he whips Patsy, is chilling. When it was released, the movie did face some criticism for the departures it took from the original work. Noah Berlatsky of The Atlantic wrote in his review that several of the incidents, including the scene where Patsy asked Northup to drown her, did not happen or were embellished in normal Hollywood style. However, as an article by Robert Toplin of the American Historical Association points out, the movie is substantially based on Northup's narrative. The difference is, though some events were embellished and some things were missed, the movie still shows the historical truth of slavery. It was brutal, inhuman, and defended by whites in the South for many years. In the context of this course, I think the movie is extremely applicable. Many of the experiences shown in the movie mirror what Norton and other historians know to be the truth about slavery. As Toplin points out in his article, if the movie does have a feeling, it is in showing the ways that slaves were able to bypass daily the brutality to make life easier for themselves, the small insurrections against their masters, such as working less or developing quiet relationships with one another. However, in my opinion, that was not the point of the film. I believe this movie was created to show viewers the raw, terrifying truth of what slavery was, because in many ways, we in industrialized nations have forgotten what slavery was truly like. To have it broadcast on the screen is not only powerful, it brings us back to the importance of remembering our history. By far the most two memorable moments in the film for me were near the end, and both revolved around the same event. After Patsy is brutally whipped by Northup under Epps's threat of death, then by Epps himself, Northup retreats to the swamp to methodically break his fiddle, the only possession of value he was allowed to keep. This destructive anger and emptiness is a stark reminder of how slavery broke down even the strongest of people. Shortly afterward, Northup pleads with Bass to send his letter to the North. However, he had already been betrayed once. The interlude in which Northup waits for a response, he stares frightened out at the world, silently and with great unfathomable emotion. To me, this was an important film for people to watch, not just students of history. Everything in this film is bittersweet, including the ending, in which Northup comes home to find his children aged and his daughter married with a son. However, the lessons of the film are important. We must never forget the brutality, pain, and horror of slavery. We must never repeat the mistakes of the past. Overall, it was a thought-provoking film, and I would highly recommend it to everyone.